So today we're just going to talk about the Elohim and Yahweh. Are there any differences? Are they the same? How do they fit together? What's going on here? Why are there two different words? So that's sort of the question for the discussion today.
Okay.
Great.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Yeah. I was thinking about this, and I was having a conversation with someone not on this topic last night on a radio show, but we were talking about, Stitchin's work, talking about the Anunnaki. Were they possibly, was there another name for them, the Watchers, as we'll be talking about, because they pop up all over the place. I just found another obscure verse in Daniel where they refer to the Watchers. So, the question was basically because, like, if you look at the Egyptian pantheon, for instance, I know I'm bouncing back and forth, and the Greek pantheon of gods, they're the same gods as far as their characteristics and what have you, but they have different names.
Yeah.
Right.
I get a real kick out of the term the Watchers, because growing up in the Christian tradition as I did, there's a hymn that's in absolutely every hymn book, which used to be one of my favorites: "Ye Watchers and ye Holy Ones." It's a hymn. It's a hymn that people don't realize. You hear it in Catholic churches, you hear it in Episcopal churches, Congregational churches, Protestant, everybody. Ye Watchers and ye Holy Ones, and the people sing it fervently because they think they're talking about one thing, and in term, what they're actually talking about, the term is exactly what you said. It was the term that was called the Watchers from Sumerian.
It's interesting because it's like Eyes Wide Shut. Kierkegaard, right, the Danish Christian theologian, the philosopher, says life is lived forward, but it's only understood backwards. Yeah. So this was always there. It's just that now we're interpreting it a different way. Yeah. So getting back though to Yahweh, there's the question: was Yahweh a watcher? Was he an Anunnaki? You're talking about what race he was. Elohim, which is the sons of God, and of course talking about in Enoch and what have you. I tend to go with Yahweh probably being obviously a humanoid astronaut, but probably one of the Anunnaki or one of those giants. I don't know who created him, but I tend to think of him as a humanoid astronaut just because of his tendencies, and his personality doesn't seem so godlike. He's jealous, he's rageful, he's controlling, he's ruthless. It doesn't seem so, depending on your definition of gods, now that we're looking at these astronauts as who appear to our ancestors to be godlike because of the technology. It's looking back, it's easier for me to see that he's not this omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent intelligence.
Yeah.
Right.
This is fascinating. For those listeners or viewers who may not be in touch with Old Testament history, can I just do a real quick synopsis of this whole business about Elohim? The word Elohim is fascinating. We hear it in Deuteronomy 6:4, the great statement of Israel. Hear, O Israel, the Lord, and that's Yahweh, our God's Elohim. Yes, not Lord. God, but God's Elohim. The Lord is one, and the word one is the word echad, which is a compound unity, kind of like in the English language, the word dozen doesn't mean, if you go out and buy a dozen eggs, you don't buy one egg, you buy a compound unity, you buy 12 eggs. So it's all plural. But what's fascinating about this is that when you begin to study ancient Israel theology, beginning back with the biblical story, the time of Abraham, they believed in many gods, even Abraham. And you know, the Bible is full of the Psalms, for instance, that are attributed to David and Solomon. The Lord our God is a great God among many gods. And so this word Elohim at the beginning shows a plural God, but it all changed, and it didn't change until 586 BC. When the Babylonian captivity, and the Babylonians came over and they took captive the cream of Israel crop. Of course, by then there had been a civil war. Israel was in the north and Judah was in the south, and the Babylonians took them all into captivity. And then the Babylonians were taken over by the Persians, and there the Hebrews who had been captured by the Babylonians came for the first time in their history under the spell of Zoroastrianism, which was a fanatic monotheistic religion. So when they came back from the Babylonian captivity, rebuilt the temple under Ezra and Nehemiah, they were a monolithic people, but they were dealing with pluralistic texts that always talked about God in the plural. And so in our Bibles, it's very confusing, because when we see the word Elohim, it's a plural noun, but it takes a singular verb. And I think the reason for that is the people who were writing down the scriptures for the first time, and they were, of course, much more ancient than this, but they were writing them down in the form that we got them. They were dealt with a little bit of a problem. They were now a monotheistic people, but they were dealing with their own ancient texts, which shows God as a plurality, as many gods, as a host of gods. So what they did was gave it that imperial we, we do this and we do that. Let us make man in our image. And so they gave it a singular verb for a plural word. So I think when we're talking about Elohim and we call that a name of God, what we're really dealing with is an edit. These people edited because they were embarrassed. Their own scriptures said that God was a plurality of gods. And now they were monotheistic after coming in terms of Zoroastrianism or Zarathustra. And so they put in the singular verb. And as a result, in our Bibles, we have, as Ken pointed out in his book, we have a real bad translation. The early God of Israel, I think, was a plurality of gods, was a group, not a person. And when you talk about Yahweh, that's the way I see it too, Michael. I think that Yahweh is one of the Elohim, or perhaps the Watchers or something. And what's really fascinating is this was the same group of people who in the book of Genesis were called the sons of God, that came down and saw that the daughters of men were fair, mated with them. And the result was the Nephilim, the mighty men, the renowned men of old.
Okay, so that brings up an interesting point, because we're talking now about basically edits and translations and things like that, whereas there seems to be this, I don't know if it's an unspoken rule or what to call it, but there's this conception that, Moses had a bunch of paper and he just wrote down the what we have today as Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers, and that's very commonly held kind of idea that Moses wrote those 5 books, and yet when we look into some of these, trying to understand what's actually going on here, it doesn't really jive with such an early writing in terms of well, maybe Moses did write some stuff. In fact, in the book of Exodus, it clearly says that Moses did write something. I have some ideas as to what the content of that is, but it's not necessarily Moses is now writing this story that we're now reading. You're right. We have all of these historical documents that have survived over hundreds and thousands of years, and have been lost, have been refound, have been translated from various different languages, because the Hebrew that Moses spoke was not.
When we were in seminary, we were taught that the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Number, and Deuteronomy, were not written by Moses way back in, back to the 1800s. They were even talking about the documentary theory, the JEDP theory, which, again, for readers who may not have read about this, the JEDP theory recognizes at least 4 different authors of the Pentateuch that were written by at least 4 different authors. One of them is called J. That's the J, that's German for Yahweh, YHVH or JHVH. And this was a title of God that was used by one of the authors. Usually it's rendered Jehovah, hence the letter J. And these documents were all written between, say, 900 and 850 BCE. The second author was called the Elohist, because he used the name Elohim for God. And these are also used in the priestly source, somewhere between 750 and 700 BCE. That was the name Elohim came into vogue. And these are the E documents. And then, of course, there's the Deuteronomic under King Josiah. This was written probably 621 BCE. And it was meant to bring the nation of Judah back into God's good graces, so to speak. And it was attributed to Moses, but it was probably written more than 1,000 years after he died. And then there was the priestly documents. That's the final letter of the JEDP thing. The letter P stands for priest, and this is a reference to the laws were defined and codified by the priests. So there's got to be at least 4 authors, J, E, D, and P, of this. And what gets me is this was taught in seminary back when Michael was in seminary, back when I was in seminary. It just didn't filter out to the pews. The people who were sitting in the pews thought, just as you said, Ken, that it was written by one guy named Moses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even at first and second year Bible college, which I did, I think they covered that, but briefly, and it wasn't something that I really took as a takeaway until years later, and when I came across it again. And I think there is something to that theory, but let's remember that it is still a theory.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have a few other kind of alternate theories around some of that. Like, I'm wondering if possibly I think there's definitely truth to that concept. What I wonder though is that maybe it's less of a distinct thing where, because when you look at a passage, well, I mean, all over in Genesis and Exodus specifically, you'll find the Yahweh and the Elohim are mentioned together in a way that the documentary hypothesis says, well, they just took 2 different versions of the same verse and they kind of crammed them together. Okay, maybe, but also maybe not. Maybe somebody actually wrote that saying, we're purposefully putting Yahweh and Elohim together in a way that is meaningful somehow, possibly like Yahweh of the Elohim, as in Yahweh is one of the Elohim. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of interpret that. I'm almost thinking that the documentary hypothesis is a way to fix a problem that doesn't exist because of that kind of thing. If you don't have the understanding that the Elohim and Yahweh are not one specific person, all rolled into one, maybe there is no problem to solve, because if you read it in a plain manner, Yahweh and the Elohim appear to be different. In Genesis 1:1, there is no Yahweh. There's the Elohim created the earth.
You do a great job on this in your book, and I love when you say Yahweh of the Elohim. I think if the JEDP theory that we've been taught for 100 years, is really neat and clean. And I tend to suspect anything that's too neat and clean. I wonder. I love that idea of Yahweh being one of the Elohim, or at least connected with the Elohim, because when you read the texts in that way, you get a total different take. You get the idea that Moses isn't meeting with a God as much as he's meeting with a committee of, to him, godlike people. And
absolutely. And that totally shows up in the book of Exodus when Moses is up on Sinai. Even here, sometimes he's talking to Yahweh, sometimes Yahweh's talking to him, sometimes Yahweh's not there, he's talking to the Elohim. And it is quite fascinating. It also comes up in after Moses's death. There's a big speech that is delivered by Joshua as they're about to enter the promised land. And they've been following this strange flying object in the sky, following it around for 40 years in the desert. All of a sudden they come to the end of their journey and they're like, this is the land that's supposed to be ours now. Which is another crazy topic that I want to talk about later. But as they're about to enter this land, Joshua it gives a kind of a big political speech and trying to hype everybody up for this new that's era that they're going into.
The famous speech where he says, "As for me and my house,
we will follow
Yahweh."
Right. Now, why does he say that? Because right before that, the verse right before his decision as to who he's going to serve, he very explicitly points out, hey guys, this is what there's all these other choices, there's all these other gods that we have that we could follow. And what's very fascinating to me is he specifically says the gods of your fathers, and he mentions Terah, which is Abraham's father specifically. And he says the God of Terah and Nahor and Abraham's ancestors who lived in Ur of the Chaldees, which is Sumer. Joshua specifically says, your ancestors who came from Sumer worshipped different gods. But I'm going to choose to worship Yahweh. So who were these other gods? And so if you think of Yahweh as one of a group of these Elohim, what does that mean? We don't know quite yet. But if he clearly seems to be one of a group, and Moses's own ancestors had basically switched sides as they moved from a different country to another land, they are now coming under a different jurisdiction of Elohim.
And it doesn't disappear after Moses either. In the book of Isaiah, for instance, the first chapter, Isaiah has basically a shamanic out-of-body experience. He's taken up and he says, I saw the Lord. He says, I saw Yahweh high and lifted up. So apparently this Yahweh of the Elohim or somebody apparently stayed around and is very much recognized in so much of the Old Testament as the God, where earlier it just simply was not the case at all.
Yeah, that's right. And Isaiah was what, 500 years after Moses?
Yeah, I think so, something like that. When we were talking about the possibilities of this plurality of, I even hesitate to use the word gods because God is so loaded. Entities.
Well, let's call them the Elohim. That is
the Elohim. That's good. Yes. And Genesis 6, the first 4 verses, and it came to pass when man began to increase upon the earth and daughters were born to them, the B'nai Elohim saw that the daughters of men were good, and they took themselves from whomever they chose. And the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the B'nai Elohim would consort with the daughters of men who would bear them children. They were the mighty who from old were men of renown. Who were these Elohim? I've often wondered, how could it be possible that sons of God, we think of them as spiritual beings, how could they mate with human women? How
Right.
did that work? What were the mechanics? And we know that B'nai Elohim means the children of the gods, or the godlike. Maybe they were, I don't know, men or entities from even other planets, someplace else in the universe that were close to us, either descended from us, or maybe we were descended from them with special powers that men did not yet have. I mean, the literal meaning of Nephilim is the fallen ones, but fallen from where? Who were these B'nai Elohim, these sons of God, and who were the Nephilim? I don't know. Thoughts?
Well, I think if you would explore the work of Zachariah Sitchin, who goes very much into his theory of the Anunnaki, and there was a lot of bioengineering going on, those kinds of things. And who knows? They could have done it the old-fashioned way, but they were definitely part of our. If you go with the Sitchin hypothesis, they were definitely part of our genetic makeup. And the fallen ones, of course, gets into the theology of, they disobeyed the creator or God, if you will. But definitely these again, I think it's pretty clear that they're astronauts. And
yeah, if you take the words "the fallen ones," if you look at that as though you're actually just reading words instead of talking about some kind of doctrinal stuff, what does it say to you? It says that they came from the sky.
They came from the sky,
above,
which, that's what all the mythologies of every civilization has always been telling us.
And
So